I can't keep this anymore, Harold announced, his voice trembling but determined. This isn't a trophy. It's a reminder of all the time I wasted. The shattering of glass echoed through the community center in Sarasota, Florida. All eyes turned to see Harold Peterson, a 71-year-old and usually the most composed man in our senior living community, standing over the remains of what had been a beautiful Crystal Award, recognition for his 40 years of dedicated service to the Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceutical Corporation. The room fell silent. Our Tuesday morning coffee group, a fixture at Pelican Bay Retirement Village for the past 5 years, had never witnessed such an outburst from Harold, the perpetually collected former executive who always wore a pressed shirt even to casual gatherings. Martha Willis, who had been distributing her famous blueberry muffins, set down her tray and approached him cautiously. "Harold, dear, what's going on?" Harold's shoulders slumped as he lowered himself into a nearby chair. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, a stark contrast to the emotional heat filling the room. "I got the results yesterday," he finally said, eyes fixed on the broken glass. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Doctor says I've got maybe 6 months." The news hit our group like a physical blow. Harold had always been the picture of health. Daily walks along Siesta Key Beach, careful attention to his diet, regular checkups. He was our inspiration, the one who organized weekly hikes through Myakka River State Park and convinced even reluctant Edith to join our water aerobics class at the community pool. "I've spent the past night thinking about my life," Harold continued, his voice growing stronger. "All those extra years I put in at the office when I could have retired at 62. The trips Margaret and I kept postponing until next year. Now Margaret's gone, and my next years are numbered." He looked up at our stunned faces, his eyes no longer sad but blazing with unexpected purpose. "I'm going to tell you something I've learned too late. Maybe you all can benefit from my mistake." That morning in Sarasota marked the beginning of what we'd later call Harold's Wisdom Project. Despite his declining health, Harold became determined to collect and share the insights of those further along the retirement journey than the rest of us, those in their late 70s and 80s, who could look back with the clarity that only approaching life's horizon can bring. Over the next 3 months, Harold interviewed 23 seniors across Florida's retirement communities, from the golf-centered villages of Naples to the artistic enclaves of St. Petersburg. He recorded their stories, their regrets, and their advice, determined that his final act would be to help others avoid the pitfalls he'd stumbled into. "My name is Thomas Calloway. I'm 72 now, and I was Harold's closest friend during those final months." What follows are the lessons Harold collected, interwoven with the stories of those who learned them the hard way. Their collective wisdom changed my perspective on retirement, and perhaps it will change yours too. Lesson 1. The clock ticks relentlessly. Beatrice Winters had been a school principal in Burlington, Vermont, for 32 years. Now 84 and living in a modest condo in Clearwater, she spends most days on her small balcony overlooking the Gulf, watching the endless dance of waves against the shore. "The ocean reminds me of time," she told Harold during their interview. "Always moving, impossible to hold back. I had the chance to retire at 60, but I stayed on for another 7 years. I thought the school needed me." Her laugh held no humor as she adjusted the light blanket over her knees, despite the Florida heat. Her circulation wasn't what it used to be. What arrogance that was. The school found a replacement within 2 weeks of my retirement announcement. Meanwhile, I lost those 7 years, years when my joints didn't ache with every movement, when I could have traveled to the Grand Canyon like I'd always dreamed. Beatrice's husband had passed 3 years earlier. They had planned an RV trip across the American Southwest, but kept putting it off until his heart gave out during a routine dental procedure. "Time is like the money in your retirement account," Beatrice reflected, watching a pelican dive into the water below. "But it's crueler. You never know exactly how much you have left, and you can't earn more when it runs out." Her advice was unambiguous. If you have the financial means to retire earlier, do it. The corporate ladder you're climbing might turn out to be leaning against the wrong wall. Lesson 2. The freedom to spend. On a sweltering July afternoon, Harold interviewed Frank and Eleanor Gilmore in their tastefully decorated home in a Boca Raton country club community. At 79 and 77 respectively, the Gilmores represented a retirement paradox, surrounded by luxury they no longer fully enjoyed. "We saved religiously," Frank explained, showing Harold a meticulously maintained ledger stretching back decades. "We invested wisely, lived below our means, did everything the financial advisor suggested." Eleanor nodded, her arthritic hands clutching a teacup. And now we have nearly $2 million that we'll never spend. The Gilmores had planned extensive travel in retirement, an African safari, cruising the Norwegian fjords, walking the Great Wall of China. But they had delayed these adventures, concerned about preserving their nest egg. We were going to do it all when Frank turned 70, Eleanor said. Then his back problem started. Then my arthritis worsened. Now we can barely manage the flight to Chicago to see our grandchildren once a year. Their spacious house was filled with travel books for destinations they would never see, exercise equipment they could no longer use, and a gleaming kitchen where Eleanor once loved to entertain before social anxiety gradually overcame her desire for company. Money is like ice cream on a hot day, Frank observed, looking out at the immaculate golf course he could no longer play. There's a perfect moment to enjoy it. Wait too long, and you're left with nothing but a sticky mess. The Gilmores' advice struck Harold deeply. Front-load your retirement experiences. The early years, what financial planners often call the go-go years, are when you'll have both the health and energy to enjoy your freedom. Later come the slow-go years, and eventually the no-go years. Your savings should be allocated accordingly. Lesson 3. The vehicle matters as much as the destination. In a modest assisted living facility in Tampa, Harold met Raymond Jackson, an 82-year-old former postal worker. Unlike many of the other interviewees, Raymond had never been wealthy. He had retired at 62 with a pension and modest savings, determined to make the most of whatever time he had left. Raymond's small room was sparsely decorated, but dominated by a treadmill and a set of dumbbells that looked well used despite their owner's advanced age. My father died at 64, Raymond told Harold. His father at 61. Heart disease runs in my family, like talent runs in the Kennedys. The comparison made Harold smile, but Raymond's expression remained serious. When I retired, I made a promise to myself. I'd break the pattern. I'd see 80. Raymond had transformed himself after retirement. He overhauled his diet, began walking 5 miles daily along Tampa's Bayshore Boulevard, and eventually worked up to lightweight training. He took cooking classes at the local community college and learned to prepare heart-healthy meals that still satisfied his southern palate. Most of my colleagues focused on their financial health for retirement, Raymond said, easily lifting a 15-pound dumbbell as he spoke, a weight Harold would have struggled with even before his diagnosis. They checked their 401k statements monthly, but wouldn't bother to check their blood pressure. Raymond's discipline had paid off. He had outlived his father by 18 years and counting, and while he moved more slowly than in his 60s, he still had the independence that many of his contemporaries had lost. Your body is like a classic car, Raymond explained. Regular maintenance matters. Skip it, and eventually, no amount of money will get it running right again. His advice was straightforward. Invest in your health with the same seriousness you invest in your retirement accounts. It's the one asset that will determine how much you can enjoy all the others. Lesson 4. The Anchor of Purpose. In a sun-drenched art studio in Key West, Harold interviewed Marianne Chun, a 77-year-old former accountant, who had discovered her passion for painting only after retiring at 65. The walls of her studio were covered with vibrant canvases, seascapes capturing the unique light of the Florida Keys, portraits of local characters, abstract works pulsing with energy. Hard to believe they were all created by someone who had spent 4 decades working with numbers rather than colors. The first year after I retired was the worst of my life, Marianne confessed, dabbing emerald green onto a canvas while she spoke. I defined myself by my work for so long that without it, I felt invisible. My days had no structure, no purpose. Depression had followed, then isolation. Her husband's death 6 months into her retirement had only deepened the void. For nearly a year, Marianne had rarely left her house except for necessary errands. Then my daughter signed me up for a beginner's painting class at the community center in Naples, where I was living then, just to get me out of the house, she said. The class had been transformative. Marianne discovered she had an eye for color and composition that no one, least of all herself, had suspected. More importantly, she found a community of fellow retirees also searching for new meaning. Having a hobby isn't just about filling time, she explained, stepping back to evaluate her work. It's about having a reason to get up in the morning. It's about continuing to grow when the world expects you to just fade away. 5 years ago, Marianne had moved to Key West, drawn by its artistic community. Now she taught classes for beginners, particularly targeting fellow retirees stuck in the same limbo she had experienced. A meaningful pursuit in retirement is like a lighthouse, she told Harold. It guides you through the fog of purposelessness that descends when your career ends. Her advice, Don't wait until retirement to explore potential interests. Plant the seeds earlier, so they'll be ready to bloom when you have time to tend them properly. Lesson 5. The Geography of Joy. The final interview in Harold's project took place in a rehabilitation center in Naples, where 81-year-old Dr. James Bennett was recovering from a hip replacement. A retired cardiologist, Dr. Bennett had once been renowned for his pioneering research at the Cleveland Clinic. I had opportunities to attend medical conferences all over the world during my career, he told Harold. Paris, Tokyo, Sydney. But I was always too busy with patients, too focused on the next research paper. I told myself I'd see the world after retirement. Dr. Bennett had retired at 68, ready to embark on the adventures he'd postponed. He and his wife had created an ambitious itinerary: the Serengeti in Tanzania, the temples of Kyoto, the Galapagos Islands. We managed exactly one trip, a Mediterranean cruise, before Caroline was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The next 7 years had been consumed by her care, watching as the vibrant, intellectually curious woman he'd married slowly disappeared. After her death 2 years ago, his own health had begun to deteriorate. The world is not as accessible at 80 as it is at 65, Dr. Bennett said, wincing slightly as he shifted position. Even with money and time, your body places limits on your horizons. The doctor's room was decorated with maps and travel books, dreams deferred until they had evaporated entirely. Yet there was no self-pity in his voice as he spoke, only a desire to help others avoid his mistake. Exploration in retirement is like picking fruit, he observed. There's a limited window when the conditions are perfect. Wait too long, and the opportunity withers. His advice was perhaps the most poignant of all. Prioritize experiences over possessions, especially early in retirement. Material things will be around tomorrow, but your ability to fully engage with the world has a shorter shelf life. Harold Peterson passed away 5 months after his diagnosis, outliving his doctor's prediction by several weeks through sheer determination to complete his project. His final days were spent organizing his interviews, extracting the wisdom he believed could help others navigate their golden years more successfully. The morning of his memorial service dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Florida day that had drawn so many of us south in the first place. Our coffee group gathered at the Pelican Bay Community Center, the same room where Harold had shattered his corporate award and changed all our perspectives. Martha had prepared a special breakfast in his honor. Edith had compiled a photo display of Harold's Wisdom Project interviews, and I had been asked to read from the journal Harold had kept during his final months. The entry I selected came from 3 days before his death. His handwriting was shaky but still legible. I've spent my life pursuing certainty, financial security, professional recognition, a stable future. Now, facing the ultimate uncertainty, I realize how much time I wasted worrying about tomorrow instead of living today. If I could start over, I would retire the moment I could afford to. I would treat my health as my most precious asset. I would spend freely on experiences in my early retirement years. I would cultivate passions beyond work long before retirement. And I would see as much of this beautiful world as possible while my body still allowed it. The strangest gift of terminal illness is perfect clarity. I see now what truly matters, though it comes too late for me to act on it. Perhaps through sharing these interviews, others can gain this clarity while there's still time to use it. A new chapter. Harold's project changed our community in ways we hadn't expected. Martha and Edith, both widows in their early 70s, used some of their savings to book a river cruise through Europe, something they'd both been postponing until someday. Raymond from Tampa was invited to establish a seniors fitness program at our community center, which now has a waiting list for participation. Frank and Eleanor Gilmore downsized from their Boca Raton mansion to a comfortable condo, using the proceeds to establish a travel fund for their grandchildren and to finally take a modified version of their dream vacation, a cruise to Alaska, which accommodated Eleanor's mobility limitations. As for me, Harold's closest friend during his final chapter, I found myself reevaluating my own retirement trajectory. I had been living cautiously, preserving my resources as though my life might extend indefinitely. Harold's project showed me the folly of such thinking. Last month, I used some of my savings to buy a small cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, a dream I'd harbored since childhood camping trips with my father. Next week, I'll begin splitting my time between Florida and Tennessee, experiencing the changing seasons again after years in perpetual summer. I've also enrolled in writing classes at the local college, determined to chronicle not just Harold's wisdom, but my own experiences navigating this complex phase of life. This manuscript is my first attempt, a tribute to Harold and the 23 seniors whose insights he collected. Whispers from the far shore. The human experience is like a vast river flowing inevitably toward the ocean. Those of us in our 60s and 70s are approaching the delta, still in the river, but close enough to the ocean to catch occasional salt spray on our faces, to hear the distant roar of waves. The wisdom Harold collected comes from those standing at the shoreline, with water already swirling around their ankles. They can see both the river behind and the infinite ocean ahead with a clarity those of us upstream cannot yet comprehend. Their message echoes with surprising consistency. Don't wait. Whether it's retirement itself, spending on experiences, focusing on health, developing passions, or exploring the world. The true regret is not in doing these things too soon, but in postponing them until it's too late. In our youth-obsessed culture, we rarely seek wisdom from the very old. We celebrate the insights of the middle-aged, the accomplishments of the young, but often turn away from those nearing life's end, as if aging were contagious or their perspective somehow less valuable. Harold's project stands as a counterpoint to this tendency. In the words of those approaching life's horizon, we can find guidance for our own journeys, provided we have the humility to listen. The ultimate freedom. I think often of something Mary Ann Chun, the accountant-turned-artist in Key West, told Harold during their interview. She described retirement as the ultimate act of self-reclamation. All our lives, she said, we trade our time for money. Retirement is when we finally stop making that trade, when we acknowledge that time is the more precious commodity. This perspective transforms retirement from an ending into a beginning, not the conclusion of productivity, but the start of a new kind of productivity, centered on personal fulfillment rather than external expectations. As I enter my 73rd year, I find myself increasingly drawn to this vision of retirement as liberation rather than cessation. The hourglass is running low for all of us. The only question is how we use the sand that remains. If there's one lesson I've learned from Harold's project, one insight distilled from the collected wisdom of those further along this path, it's this. Don't delay retirement if you have the financial means to embrace it. Too often, I've watched friends and colleagues postpone their freedom only to have health issues arise that severely limited the very experiences they had been saving for. The corporate world continues seamlessly without any of us, while our personal timelines are painfully finite. Perhaps the most profound benefit I've discovered in retirement is selectivity in human connections. I no longer must tolerate relationships of convenience or necessity. I can surround myself exclusively with people who bring joy, wisdom, and authenticity into my life. This freedom to choose my companions has proven to be retirement's greatest blessing, one that no financial advisor ever mentioned in our planning sessions. The coffee group at Pelican Bay continues to meet every Tuesday morning. Harold's chair remains empty by unspoken agreement, but his presence lingers in our conversations, in our choices, in our growing willingness to embrace the present rather than defer joy to some theoretical future. Last week, as we gathered around our usual table, Martha announced she'd signed up for salsa dancing lessons, something she'd always wanted to try, but had been too self-conscious to attempt. Life's too short to worry about looking foolish, she declared, eyes twinkling. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We all laughed, recognizing Harold's favorite phrase. He had used it whenever one of us expressed hesitation about trying something new or taking a calculated risk. The sunlight streamed through the windows of our community center, painting golden patterns across the table. Outside, palm trees swayed in the gentle Florida breeze. In that moment, I felt a profound gratitude for this chapter of life, for the wisdom of those ahead on the path, for the time that remains, and for the freedom to fill it with purpose and joy. The journey continues. The river flows. And if we're wise enough to listen to those standing at the shoreline, perhaps we can navigate these final bends with grace, purpose, and fewer regrets. After all, as Harold wrote in his final journal entry, the true purpose of wisdom is not to comfort the dying, but to guide the living. May we have the courage to be guided accordingly. Subscribe to our channel for more supportive conversations about aging with grace and dignity. On this channel, we continue exploring how to make the golden years truly golden through purposeful habits that support the health of the body, mind, and spirit.